Everyone, let's move. This is going to be the last talk in this series of Grace Consciousness. That this will be our fourth Sunday of doing. So if you haven't been here, you can just catch up real easy with it. So just in case there's someone new, and there are a few new people here this morning, I want to explain a little bit about what race consciousness is. In New Thought, which is what this is, science of mind, race consciousness is used a lot, and that's the collective unconscious. It's the accumulation of all of our thoughts, our beliefs, our values, our words, our actions, all of it. We as a human race, as a humankind, have every thought we've ever had, everything we've ever done is in this field of limitless unconsciousness, really, and we call it race consciousness. Ernest Holmes, the founder of Science of Mind, calls it race consciousness. So I just want you to get an idea of that we are all part of this oneness that is influenced by this race consciousness. And what we've been doing is exploring different ways of bringing, to shift a little bit out of race consciousness by adding that G of God into it, which brings us to grace consciousness, because grace consciousness is the place that we really want to live our lives from. And we're going to try, because it's very challenging to describe the indescribable, because grace is indescribable. So without going into specifics or examples, what we've been talking about, we realize that the majority of our race consciousness, this collective unconscious, is based in fear and in lack and limitation and separation. And the previous Sunday, last Sunday, I suggested that if you don't feel this is true, simply watch or listen to the news, just for 15 minutes, and tell me if every single story is not based in fear and lack and limitation and separation. Because usually, maybe you'll get a good story in there, but usually that is what it's based in. And it makes us not, especially, we become more sensitive to our energy, around us as we deepen into these spiritual teachings of New Thought. And so then we don't feel as good after we watch it. How many feel great after you watch it? Really great. Feel good, right? Uplifted. No, you want to know what's going on sometimes, but again, that's a whole nother subject, which I won't go into. But we're bringing God into the equation. And what we know is that we are unconsciously affected by all of these race consciousness ideas until we start moving into God thinking, into grace thinking. This entire month, we have focused on bringing God to race consciousness so that we could have that whole feeling of this divine experience, of feeling better, of raising our vibration, and we can only do that if we bring something divine into the equation, hence grace consciousness. Today we end this topic by but going back to the very beginning, which began actually on Easter Sunday. That's when we began this whole topic of grace. And what I mean is that we are going to look at and have an experience, hopefully, of this concept of grace. And in fact, it is our intention this morning to be in the presence of grace, to really just have our move, breathe, have our being in this consciousness of grace, of peace, of divine givingness. And so there's a bit of a paradox here, as there is in so many things in life. Even though all month we have been talking about grace consciousness, grace really isn't something that we can talk about. Not fully. It's like talking about God. It's really our opinion of what this higher power is, of what this creative force is. it's our opinion of it, is indescribable, so it's kind of impossible to describe God or to describe grace. And I don't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. I'm just saying that it's incredibly challenging to discuss it, to really grasp it fully, because it's so beyond anything that we can encompass in our thinking. Just as divinity, as the divine mind of God, we have many names for this supreme power. We can call it God, we can call it spirit, we can call it love intelligence, divine wisdom. We can call it perfect grace. That is what this whole creative field of love is about. But we're not really able to capture the whole thing. But we talk about it so we can uplift our spirits, our vibration, because it is a part of the awe and the mystery of God. And as soon as we put words to something like that, we confine it. We confine it. We make it smaller than what it truly is. As soon as we try to describe that which is infinite and ineffable, we make it finite and limited. Grace, God's grace, divine grace is something that cannot be confined. It is forever expanding itself in beauty and love and givingness. So it is something that we cannot restrict, and it is something that is not limited. There is no limitation in the mind, in the nature of the divine. There's nothing to limit it. We in our thinking, and because of this race consciousness, have put a lot of impact on lack and limitation, on fear. And what I'm saying is, when you bring that G into the grace consciousness, you eliminate the fear, or you transmute the fear. Every time you think of this perfect love and this divine givingness of God, you raise your vibration. You overcome the fear. That doesn't mean it's not going to pop up, but then we remember, wait a second. I am created in the likeness and the image of the divine. Therefore, all good is mine by my birthright. So God's grace is not something that can be confined. Nonetheless, realizing that words are inadequate, I hope to bring us all to a greater heart understanding, a heart understanding. We know that the heart has so much intelligence in it, and in the heart there is no judgment. That's all in the mind area, where we think and we judge. The heart only knows, is much more powerful in its thinking, heart thinking. Heart understanding. So it's a heart understanding of the amazing concept behind the word grace and the power of grace to take us to a place that transcends the general consciousness of this human race. It transcends it, and thereby having a hand in transforming the consciousness of the human race. We do it. Mother Teresa said that. We do it one heart at a time. People say, what can I do? I'm just one person, you're everything. One heart at a time. One heart at a time. So let us begin by doing our best to define that which is indefinable. We can do that. And so I always like to enjoy looking at the origin of a word. And so grace comes to us from the ancient root of a word meaning favor or benefit. And our dear friend Noah Webster put a definition to grace in his most famous book, the dictionary. And so according to it, God's grace is divine love and protection bestowed freely on people. Do we love feeling that divine protection when we can feel so vulnerable and so alone and so afraid sometimes in this human experience? To know there is a higher power that is not only all around us but is within us? It's so uplifting. It's so comforting to myself. In Psalms chapter 45, verse 2, it's written, "Grace is poured upon your lips. Therefore, God has blessed you forever." Do you ever feel that you're a blessing of God? It's a good thing to feel. The Apostle Paul wrote, "By grace you have been saved through faith, And this is not our own doing. It is a gift of God, not because of any works, lest any man should boast. And our founder, Ernest Holmes, wrote this: grace is the givingness of spirit to its creation. So this divine energy is always giving to us. We are worthy. We are born with that God spark within us that is our God self, and that is part of all the oneness of life. If we were to summarize just a handful of thoughts about grace then, we could say that grace is God's divine love, freely given to all. God's eternal protection, freely given to all. God's ever-present blessings, freely given to all. God's complete givingness, freely bestowed upon all. God's gift of absolute favor and benefit, freely given to all. And these are ways to define this divine grace. Inadequate though they might be, we get a flavor of it, we get a feeling of it. And you caught that the ending phrase in all of those descriptors was freely given to all. It's free. All of these things are free. You know, we think that we have to buy, and it's free. It's there already, waiting for our recognition of it. Grace as a divine favor. Grace as the eternal loving kindness of God. It's working for us and through us and as us. You do not have to earn grace. It is freely given. Isn't that beautiful? You can't buy it. You can't buy it. It's freely given. And it is something that is paid out only, and it's not something that is paid out only to the good and deserving. Only if you're really good and deserving, as race consciousness says, then you receive it. Grace is not something to work for, to develop, to build up, to cultivate. It simply is. God's favor, God's givingness, love, protection, and blessings come to us simply because we are. Simply because we are. It's not like God has given grace to just a couple of few people over here and just left out everyone else. Everyone is deserving of all of these qualities of the divine. It's our birthright. It's what gives us that feeling of contrast. Like human experiences taking place, events and circumstances are taking place. Well, why do they sometimes feel awful or sometimes feel good? They feel awful or good, but usually the contrast of the awfulness of it, because that divine nature within us is peace, is love, is abundance. There is nothing lacking. There is nothing missing. And so you feel that contrast. Now, when you're in alignment, that means when you're in a place of complete happiness and joy and love, then you feel aligned. You feel great. Does that make sense to everyone?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Because it sure makes sense to me. It's why we have the contrast. So we can grow and learn and find the lesson in everything. So Holmes wrote this in Science of Mind. God loves all alike and causes the rain to fall and the sun to shine alike upon all. In arms which are all inclusive, divine love encompasses everything. I think that's beautiful. In the arms which are all inclusive, divine love encompasses everything. Nothing's left out. We've probably all said or heard one time or another, there but the grace of God go I, which is, you know, a weird statement if you take it apart and really look at it. Because what's going on when we say that? Usually we're so happy we're not in that position that that person is in. So we say there, but by the grace of God go I. But really that's inaccurate, right? Because the grace of God is present in everyone. But we just sit there and we go, phew! Wipe our brow and say, goodness, that's not taking place. That's only in that person's life. But that implies that lack of limitation. That implies that that person is not worthy of grace, just when we say that. It's a new way of like holding that statement in our thinking. Where was I when, where was this person when God was giving out grace? At the refreshment stand somewhere, buying something, doing something? No, that's what it implies. So we're saying that God's grace is present for everyone. Yet we must receive it. Here's the part. We must receive it. We must accept it. We must open our hearts to it, our minds, our very lives, for God's grace to have its way with us. It can't get through if we're not aware. That's why in all the spiritual teachings, you'll hear awareness is the number one step in waking up and realizing there's more to life. Because we're spiritual beings having the human experience, there's more to life than just the human experience. There is a spiritual experience, but we can only have it when we are open, when we are receptive to it. If we are not, if we're just in life, dealing with life on life's terms, there's no way for it to come into us. And it's already present. That's the perfection of it. It's already present, but we have to open up to it, become aware. In the Revealing Word from Charles Fillmore Reference Library, Charles Fillmore is the co-founder of Unity, the spiritual center is called Unity. He wrote, "Grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. That is, the real saving, redeeming, transforming power came to man through the work that Jesus did in establishing for the race a new and higher consciousness on the earth." A new and higher consciousness. One of the first, as I said before, New Thought teachers. There were many before him. There are many after him. But he taught unity. He taught oneness. He taught that the Father and I are one. He taught that. And he was crucified for that. Because he was giving people power. He was empowering people. These good works that I do, you can also do. He was saying this to people, and at that time, that was not acceptable. Took away the power. So think for a moment that you are climbing a mountain. This is just a little example. The summit is an experience of the presence of God. That is your goal. So you're climbing this mountain, and when you get to the top, you're going to experience complete enlightenment, God. To reach this summit, through human effort, you climb to a high meadow, and it is a beautiful place. And you think you have arrived at your goal. You've gotten to the top of this summit. But eventually, you realize that this is not the summit. The peak is shrouded in mist. You cannot even see the trailhead which led you to this experience that you desire. Because we all want to desire to feel love, to feel peace, to feel abundance, to feel one with all that is, to feel the freedom of life. Wow, the freedom of life. And we think that if we do this and we make this happen and we go over here and do something else and we study this, that we are going to be enlightened. Sometimes it doesn't happen. However, in the distance, so you're up on this summit, however, in the distance you see a woman walking toward you, and it's someone that's going to lead you to a higher place, and her name is Grace. With Grace, you are taken into the mist. You are taken into the mist. You're on the summit. You can't see the great awakening that you want, but through grace, you are taken through that mist. That is the presence, and ultimately into grace consciousness, which is your awakening into oneness. This whole teaching is about oneness. It's about, we're all connected, whether we know it or not. We are all connected. We're all part of the one life. And the great creator is God, and we're all part of that. We were created out of the nature of the divine. So during our climb to this higher meadow, our spiritual practices are like a wind, taking us to higher and higher states of consciousness, and allowing us to be more receptive to God's grace. But practice alone will not reveal the total oneness in spirit, not fully. We must wait for grace to come. The grace of God. You've said this. But the grace of God, this feels like the grace of God, is such a beautiful, it's when everything synchronizes and comes into a complete harmony. It feels like the grace of God. That's the grace of God, which is indescribable. I felt it. I'm sure you've all felt it, but I cannot describe it fully. And I'm sure you felt it. In other words, we can never do enough to live in the presence of grace. It's not about doing. Truly waking up to grace consciousness is not a result of working on ourselves. It's not. It's about the recognition of ourselves, that we are divine beings, that we are capable of limitless potentiality. There is nothing to confine us, but our thinking makes it so. Our thinking stops us. That's the race consciousness we've been talking about moving out of. Joel Goldsmith, wonderful New Thought writer, in The Art of Meditation wrote this: "But the basis of our work is to leave your nets, to leave this search for more, and to open consciousness to the spiritual realities. Grace can only be attained by a state of inner silence, a state of inner awareness and receptivity." And I will add a state of inner awareness and receptivity to the recognition of who we truly are. Children of the divine, heirs to the kingdom of the divine. That's the presence of grace. When we really get it, when we really realize that we are such beautiful, eternal spiritual beings, that's the grace of God. We are the presence. We are. And when we have that recognition, then the energy of grace will come upon us like a soft blanket, which we need for comfort, just to feel safe, secure, and cared for. That's the feeling of grace, when we're in that place of feeling safe, secure, and cared for. Filling us with the feeling that regardless of circumstances, regardless of what looks like roadblocks that surround us, and whatever like the great belief, the race consciousness is about a situation, all that is removed when the time is right. Have you ever noticed that situations and circumstances change? They don't stay forever. But the divinity, the spirituality that God sparked within us is our eternal true self. That's the grace when you really recognize that. It's beautiful. Grace is an unreasonable force. It pays no mind to what we consider difficult. It doesn't. It has the power to lift us beyond our abilities and to draw support into our lives when we need it. It's the all-sufficiency. It's Joel Goldsmith said, "Thy grace is my sufficiency." And that's an affirmation that was one of my favorites. Thy grace is my sufficiency. Over and over again you can say that when the roadblocks of life appear. Thy grace is my sufficiency. When such moments occur, you might ask yourself, as you give thanks for what you are receiving, whether the power behind the coming together of the right people and the right circumstances at the right time isn't the presence of grace. You can't plan those things. Remember, we talk about, we make the intention, and then we let God's grace fill in how it's going to happen, how it's going to happen. Because you know when you've set and you've really known something was going to take place in your life, you just were very clear on it. The people presented themselves, the situations all lined up. It was divine right order. We never could have planned it. That's the grace of God. That's the grace of God right there. So let us take a moment right now to live in that presence of grace. So what I'm going to do is close with an affirmative prayer. Okay? So I ask you to just join me in that. You can close your eyes if you like or not. And so we take a breath, a collective breath. And we just know that there is a divine grace that is always there, fully and completely, guiding us, protecting us, loving us, surrounding us with its warmth of infinite peace, infinite joy, infinite love, infinite in all that it does. For the nature of God creates out of itself all of life in all its many different forms, never repeating itself, always creating new, because it's limitless in its thinking. Divine mind is limitless. Infinite potential, infinite creation. And this creative genius has created each and every person, no one alike, no animal alike, no blade of grass alike. It is all unique, but of the same essence. And so I know that the truth for each one here is that we move, we live, move, breathe, have our being in this state of grace, calling forth from within and without that God guidance, that God love, that God fulfillment. It's all divine and it's all perfect. And when we bring that into our everyday experiences, we then have this activity of grace filling our thoughts, our words, our actions. Grace makes the way easy and perfect and beautiful. And I give thanks for this spiritual knowing, for these spiritual teachings of New Thought that provide us with the power to co-create with the divine all of our activities and experiences in life. We can always choose. And that is the grace of God through the choice of choosing that which serves our highest good. I am deeply grateful to know that each one here is at the summit of where they need to be to experience this grace, to experience the love of divinity, to experience the openness, the freedom, and the love. And knowing that this word is complete, I release it fully and absolutely into the graceful arms of God, where this word is made manifest in the most perfect ways in each and everyone's life, right here, right now. And knowing this is so, I let it be, and so it is.
So it is.
Ooh.